Hey folks, thanks for joining. We're just gonna wait another moment as folks get into the room and then we'll get started. But thank you for coming today. And if you're just joining, we're just gonna wait another minute because people are still trickling in, but thanks so much for joining us. Okay, we might have some stragglers, but I think we've sort of leveled off in terms of the initial entrance. So I think we can get started. So thank you for joining this briefing on the SAVE plan and legal challenges webinar. My name is Winston. I'm going to introduce myself and my co-presenter Abby in a moment, but want to make sure we're all in the right place and want to also let you know what we're going to be talking about today. If at any point my slides go awry, Abby or my colleague Amy, who's on, please just let me know. So here's the agenda for today. We are talking about, we're going to give an overview of the SAVE plan. We're going to try not to assume any background on the federal student loan system or what the SAVE plan is or who's suing whom about what. And we're going to try to break that down as simply as possible. So we'll talk about the SAVE plan. We'll talk about what the challenges are, the legal challenges, I should say, to the state plan by a couple of states, why this is important, and then how groups, folks who are zooming in today or colleagues who couldn't make it today can get involved and what next steps sort of look like. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. The Q&A feature is enabled. So if you have questions, please put them in and we'll address them on the back end. I would say maybe just hold off for a couple minutes because your question might be answered in the presentation and it'll just be easier for us to sort through and hit questions that we haven't yet addressed if there are fewer. So just wait a couple minutes before you start using the Q&A, but then it should be available. So before we get into substance, just a little bit of, who are we and maybe why are we talking to you? So I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Abby, to introduce herself from the National Consumer Law Center. Then I'll take it back and jump into the substance.
Thanks, Winston. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Shafroth. I'm the co-director of advocacy and the director of the Student Loan Borrower Assistance Project at the National Consumer Law Center. Briefly, the National Consumer Law Center is a national organization that focuses on consumer protection, and we cover a number of areas: debt collection, unfair and deceptive practices, lending and other areas of consumer law, with a focus on protecting and representing the interests of low-income consumers. And for years, we've had a student loan borrower assistance project focused specifically on consumer protection law as applies to student loans. And we work to support legal aid organizations and to provide direct education and policy advice on student loan issues. I'll hand it back to Winston.
Great. Thanks so much, Abby. And again, my name is Winston Berkman-Breen. I'm the legal director at a group called the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're also a national group. We focus on policy related to ending the student debt crisis for millions of Americans and engage in all sorts of work from litigation to policy ideation to technical assistance for partners and research and reporting. That's sort of the high level. I want to reiterate, because what Abby and I both just sort of described might seem sort of technical, and if any of you are scratching your head, like, how did I find myself on this webinar? I work in a community college, or I do direct services, but nothing to do with consumer protection or student loan debt. Then, you are certainly in the right place. A lot of what our organizations do is partner and provide that technical expertise and technical assistance to groups all across the country. And so what we want to do is, this might be a new topic to you, it might not be, but explain some of the student loan major issues going on today, and then how we can help you and how you all can engage in your community at the community level in a couple of states, as will become clear in a few slides. So starting from the beginning, we're going to talk today about something called the SAVE plan. So the SAVE plan stands for Saving on a Valuable Education. And to contextualize this, the SAVE plan is one of several loan repayment options that federal student loan borrowers have when they take out a federal student loan borrowers. And this is just a very simple graphic representation here. I don't, you know, just to sort of set the stage. When you take out a federal student loan, you can either pay it off during what's called the standard repayment plan. So you're just sort of making 10 years worth of payments. How much do you owe? How much you have to pay each month for 10 years to pay it off, right? Or you can pay under what's called the extended plan, which extends that time period. So each monthly payment is lower. You can also do something called the graduated repayment plan, where your payments start lower and sort of step up with time. What you see represented here is that red line, that red horizontal line is the consistent standard plan amount, and the purple is what you're actually paying, right? So it's longer and less affordable, or sorry, less expensive, or the same amount of time, but starts cheaper and ends more expensive. We're going to focus on the bottom right option, which is income-driven repayment plans. These are the plans where your monthly payment isn't based on how much you owe, but it's pegged to how much you make, right? As your income goes up, you pay more. As your income goes down, you pay less. And the SAVE plan, as I'll discuss in a moment, is the latest iteration of one of these income-driven repayment plans. So in general, the income-driven repayment, or IDR plans, use a formula to figure out how much you owe. They focus on something called discretionary income, which is the amount of your income above a certain percentage of the federal poverty level. They then take that discretionary amount, again, above the federal poverty level that is chosen, and they take a certain percentage of it and then divide that by 12, right? And that's your monthly payment. And in that way, it's meant to be affordable, right? If your income goes down, you can recalculate that and it'll proportionally go down. Because there's that federal poverty level floor, anyone who makes below the percentage of the federal poverty level ends up paying $0, and it's considered a payment. But because there's no discretionary income, if you're sufficiently low income in this sense, you know, a percentage of $0 above the discretionary income level is $0, right? Another feature of IDR that you may be familiar with is that it's another way to get student loan debt cancellation, right? There's a lot in the news these days about student loan debt cancellation, and Biden going up to the Supreme Court last year. This is actually not that. This is a sort of decades old, congressionally enacted, if your loans are in repayment for a certain period of time, they should get canceled. And the phenomenon that happens with IDR payments is that because you are paying lower dollar monthly payments, you don't always pay enough to cover the interest that accrues every month. So that interest stacks up and stacks up and stacks up, and your balance can grow and grow and grow. And that's when people experience this phenomenon of like, oh my gosh, I only borrowed $15,000. How do I owe $90,000, right? That's what that is. And it can be very emotionally distressing, in addition to financially problematic, right? So as a result of this, these programs, the IDR plans, offer an escape valve. So if you've been in one of the plans for 20 or 25 years, depending on your loan type, your remaining debt will be forgiven, canceled, right? Because otherwise, how do you stop the debt from accruing? So that's a really helpful feature of it. It also plays into the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. If you work in public service and make payments on your loans under an IDR plan, you can get your debt canceled in 10 years. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So IDR is very important. It's an important tool. The system is imperfect and IDR is imperfect, but as we'll discuss, it's getting better. These 4 sub-bullets down here are have been the predominant types of IDR plans for the past couple of years. They all have very small differences from each other, but they effectively all do the same thing. Figure out your discretionary income, take a percentage of it, divide it by 12, and that is your monthly payment, and you get your debt canceled after a certain period of time. So now enter the SAVE plan. The SAVE plan is the latest and frankly greatest of these IDR plans, and it was announced last summer and went into effect in part last fall. And what the SAVE plan does that makes it the most generous, which is to say the most affordable of all the IDR plans for federal student loan borrowers, is it sets that equation for what your discretionary income is based on the federal poverty level much higher, which means more of your income is protected. For the other plans, it's generally 150% of the federal poverty level. And below, these numbers are sort of made up, but just go with me, right? If the federal poverty level is $20,000, just because that's a nice even number, 150% of that would be $30,000, right? So anything under 30,000 is not considered discretionary income and isn't put in the calculation. So if you make less than $30,000, you would pay $0 under an IDR plan. The 4 traditional plans that I just mentioned all use this 150% of the federal poverty level. calculation. The SAVE plan is increasing that to 225. So please don't make me do the math again, but it's basically going up to like, what is that, like 45%, $45,000 in my very simple number example. Again, that's not the actual numbers. So that's significantly more generous to begin with. In addition to that, the percentage of that discretionary income that is then used to calculate your monthly payments is being lowered for undergraduate debt from 10% to 5%. So if you have, a little bit of money above that threshold, it's going to be basically cut in half, right? You're not going to get charged 10% divided by 12, you're going to get charged 5% divided by 12. This math is not really the point. The point is that it's a significantly more affordable plan than its predecessors. Another key feature of the SAVE plan, which makes it much more generous, is that problem of interest accruing and accruing and accruing and your balance going up and up and up has been eliminated. What they're doing is any interest that isn't covered by the monthly payment is being waived. It's being just forgiven and doesn't accrue on your balance. And that's even true if you have a $0 payment because you are low income. So we're not going to see this phenomenon of balances ballooning and people sort of getting crushed by that debt. It also is more generous in that it recognizes that some households, even if they're married, handle their finances differently, and it won't count spousal income if you file your taxes separately. So what does this actually mean? In this graphic, I'll just sort of try to explain. This is put out by the Biden administration. This just shows, how many people will ultimately get a $0 payment under the SAVE plan based on their income, and then what their payment would look like based on their income above that. So you can see here that on the left middle side, that 30,000, the calculation is that anyone making less than $32,800, that is the equivalent of 225% of the federal poverty level for an individual person. So anyone making less than that has $0 of discretionary income. They have no income above that, which means that their payments will be $0. And then as it goes up, you see their payments increase from $60 up to 227, which is on this chart if they're making above $60,000. And then the family size matters too. So for a family of 4, that similar threshold for how much you have to make before you start having a monthly payment is $67,500, right? So that's not even represented on here. But for a family of 4, if you're making less than $67,000, you're gonna have a $0 payment on your loan. So that's really like a big difference from before. Okay. And let's see, I'm having some issue with the slide here. Oh, there's a sequence. This is a feature that I didn't intentionally include on this, but I'm gonna go with it. So the Biden administration, I'm just gonna try to put all of these on here at once. I didn't know I even knew how to do fade-ins. So when the Biden administration announced this in the fall, they put out some stats based on their review of their data of student loan borrowers in the country. And I don't want to fully read these, but I'll just give highlights, right? Which is to say that there'll be basically a 40% drop per dollar borrowed on repayments, substantial savings for people who have 4-year grad degrees. That's just one example. Substantial savings for people who are working in public service. One example is a teacher, $17,000 in total payments. That's huge. I didn't mention this, but a feature of the SAVE plan, and apologies for not mentioning it earlier, is that if you are a lower dollar borrower, you didn't borrow very much, instead of having to wait that 20 or 25 years to get your debt canceled, it'll be canceled after 10 years. And they anticipate that 85% of community college borrowers will benefit from that, which is to say they didn't borrow more than $12,000 for their college education. And as a result of that, will get their debt canceled if they have any remaining debt after 10 years. And again, if they're low income, they could have 10 years of $0 payments and then get debt cancellation as a result of that. And then there are huge racial equity sort of civil rights components here too, in terms of borrowers who are going to see payment reductions over the life of their loans and just not having to pay as much and end up paying, multiples of how much they borrowed, which is unfortunately the case for a lot of people now. So that is in a nutshell the SAVE plan. The spark notes, like the takeaways are that it is, nothing is perfect these days, but it is by far the most generous repayment plan the federal government has ever offered on federal student loans to borrowers, and it addresses a lot of the particular pain points, which is to say the interest accumulating and the former payments not being very affordable that borrowers have expressed. So, there's always work to do, but the plan as presented will change, millions of borrowers' lives, and we'll get into some more specifics in some specific states in a couple of slides. But As great as that sounds, I'm now going to let Abby take it over to talk about the bad news and really what brings us all here today.
Thanks, Winston. Yeah, so we're here today because this plan that was announced last summer and which the department has already begun rolling out to millions of Americans has recently been the subject of 2 lawsuits. So in the past roughly a month, we've seen 2 lawsuits filed. And sort of question arises, this plan sounds really good. Who could possibly be opposed to making student loans more affordable? Well, it turns out that 18 states are the entities that are suing to try to stop this plan and to prevent borrowers from being able to benefit from it. So as I mentioned, there are 2 lawsuits that have been filed. Each lawsuit has been filed by a group of states, and I've organized them for you on the screen. You can see that the 2 cases are Kansas versus Biden, where the Attorney General of Kansas is leading the charge, along with the other states listed below, and Missouri versus Biden, where the Attorney General of Missouri is leading the charge. If you pay attention to elections, you might notice that all of these states share something in common. They all have Republican leadership. I think it is fair to say that student debt relief has become highly politicized, and we're seeing increasingly that anything to do with student loans just becomes the subject of partisan politics. So I think it's fair to say that this is what we're seeing here. But yeah, we're as we'll talk about later, we're especially interested in engaging advocates from these states on this issue, because it seems that your government is trying to stop borrowers from being able to benefit from these plans. The next slide.
We might have another slow fade in here, so apologies for that. I'm going to just bring them all up.
No problem. And I'll go ahead and talk while you do that, so we don't miss time. So Winston's just talked about how wonderful the SAVE plan is and all that it does for teachers, for community college students, for Black and brown borrowers, for low-income borrowers. So why are these states opposed to it, and what did SAVE actually do to hurt them? States, in order to get into court and to have the court hear their arguments, they have to have an argument that the SAVE plan hurt them, to give them standing and a right to challenge the plans in court. So some of the arguments that they've made for why the SAVE plan is hurting them are that they rely on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in order to be able to attract and retain government employees. And that's great that their employees are getting the benefits of PSLF. But this is a funny argument to make, because the SAVE plan actually makes the PSLF program work even better. It increases the benefits of PSLF by still allowing borrowers to get their loans forgiven after 10 years in public service, making qualifying payments, but making those payments lower and more affordable while they're in it. In fact, the Urban Institute did a study last fall where they found that people who participate in the PSLF program are amongst those who will receive the greatest benefits of the SAVE plan. So this is a pretty funny argument to be making. The second argument that they make is that they might lose state tax revenues because more debt will be canceled during a federal tax-free period now through 2025. What do I mean by that? The Congress passed a law during the pandemic saying that any student loans that are discharged between 2021 and the end of 2025 will not be counted as income for federal tax purposes. And a bunch of states just sort of automatically follow federal tax law. And so some of these states are saying, well, you're going to have increased amounts of student loans discharged between now and the end of 2025, and we're going to miss out on being able to tax those benefits because we follow federal tax law. And on that argument, I think it's flawed both on the facts and on the law. On the law, the courts have several times thrown out similar arguments, including last time in the Biden v. Nebraska case about the one-time cancellation, because states are responsible for their own tax policy. They can't claim that they're hurt by the SAVE plan because they're losing out on state tax revenues when it's their own choice to decide not to tax those loans forgiven through this plan. I think they're also flawed as a factual matter here, because part of their argument is that there's going to be more debt forgiven, not just between now and 2025, but after 2025. And so they'll actually see more loans being forgiven after 2026, when they're able to tax those again if they want to. And they would be free to change their tax law to tax it now. So I think this is a pretty easy one for the courts to throw out, and they should lose on this ground as well. The other arguments the main argument that they make is that MOHELA and potentially other unnamed entities like it might lose money. And so what does MOHELA have to do with this? So MOHELA is a federal student loan servicer that is, in contract with the Department of Education, and amongst other things, it is paid for servicing federal student loan accounts, and doing a bang up job of it. And this is the argument that worked in the Biden v. Nebraska challenge to President Biden's one-time cancellation plan. That was how they got their foot in the courthouse door, by saying that that because canceling all of those loans would mean that MOHELA would lose accounts that it was servicing, and it was paid per account. MOHELA would lose money, and MOHELA has a relationship with the state of Missouri, and Missouri sort of said, if MOHELA loses money and they're almost like an arm of our state government, we get to claim that injury as our own, and so therefore we have standing to challenge this plan. As I said, that worked against the one-time cancellation, but I think it should not work here. The facts are very different. It is not at all clear that MOHELA would lose any money as a result of the SAVE plan. It might, in fact, make more money under the SAVE plan, and it's not clear that courts would credit Missouri losing, or MOHELA losing, any student loan accounts, even if it would under the SAVE plan, which is not clear, because as an injury, because MOHELA actually just asked the Department of Education to take accounts out of its portfolio. It said, we can't actually handle all the accounts that we've been given. We've been given too many accounts to service. We can't do this all. Please take 1 million accounts away from us. So the argument that it would, lose a few tens of thousands of accounts as a result of this plan doesn't seem like any strong argument that it would actually be harmed, or that Missouri as a state would be harmed by this plan. If we could go on to the next slide. So yeah, in a nutshell, all of these arguments amount to that we states are making money off of keeping our residents in debt, and we want the federal government to stop debt relief so that we can keep making money off our indebted residents. I don't think it's a good political argument or a good legal argument, but that's where we are. So what has SAVE actually done for these states? I think it's done a tremendous amount of good, which is why we have Jane Lynch here whooping it up and cheering. It has lowered monthly student loan bills for hundreds of thousands of residents in these 18 states. It has also made tens of thousands of residents in these 18 states student debt free. Those seem like those should be really good things for the states, and things that their state government should be supporting. All right, so moving past standing, what are the legal arguments that these states are making that the SAVE plan should be struck down? In a nutshell, there's like hundreds of pages of briefing on this, but I'm going to give it to you in a couple of minutes. The big thrust of their argument is that the major questions doctrine should apply here. So they say that because the SAVE plan costs about as much as the one-time cancellation plan that was struck down last summer, that it should therefore be considered sort of economically and politically significant and trigger the major questions doctrine, which is this new doctrine that is used to sort of second guess agency action and put the thumb on the side of blocking federal regulations. The major questions doctrine would say that there has to be exceedingly clear statutory language authorizing an agency action or a regulation, rather than applying the typical rules of statutory interpretation to assess whether a statute gave the Secretary of Education authority to act. So that's their sort of first argument. In addition to that, they make a kitchen sink of other arguments that amount to essentially the plan is just too generous to student loan borrowers. They really sort of harp on this point that the typical borrower who doesn't have any graduate debt, so their typical borrower is already skewed, would pay back less than they borrowed under the plan. And they sort of say, oh, you're converting the loan program into a grant program, and this is can't possibly be what Congress would have allowed. Everything seems to sort of cycle back to that. Of course, a program where you have to pay back most, if not all, of what you borrowed. And if you do well, you have to pay back even more than what you borrowed. And regardless, you're in this debt for at least 10 to 25 years. Would seem like a pretty terrible grant program to me. It's pretty clear that we're still dealing with a loan program here. But yes, they pile on with sort of APA challenges, statutory interpretation, failure of notice and comment because they only had 30 days to comment, notwithstanding the fact that 13,000 other organizations and entities managed to submit comments in that amount of time. They just try to throw everything at the wall to see what sticks here. Why should these arguments fail? Well, first off, Congress really clearly authorized the Secretary of Education to establish income-driven repayment plans and to define the amount of monthly payments and the length of repayment. I've put in the statutory site here, 20 USC 1087E. The language is really straightforward and simple. So if you just look strictly at the statutory text, it should be clear that the Secretary of Education is authorized to create the SAVE plan. Additionally, unlike the one-time cancellation that was challenged in Biden v. Nebraska, this is not a novel use of statutory authority. There's nothing new or unprecedented about this. This is exceedingly normal rulemaking. We went through the full notice and comment rulemaking process with negotiated rulemaking. It took 3 years. There was tremendous public input. And what resulted is a set of rules that look very similar to the IDR plans that have been created under the same statutory authority for the past 30 years, since Congress first authorized the Secretary to create these sorts of plans in 1993. This is the 4th time we've seen an income-driven repayment plan created under this same statutory authority. And all of these plans look essentially the same in structure. They differ only in details and about sort of how generous they are. So this is nothing like the one-time cancellation plan that was challenged in the Supreme Court last summer. This is something that is routine rulemaking. It's sort of shocking that it is even being challenged, but this is where we are. So sort of in conclusion, I think that these cases should not even make it to the merit stage. They should be dismissed for lack of standing, since the SAVE plan doesn't actually harm the 18 states challenging it. Their challenges are actually just political challenges. And even if we did move forward to the merits and their request for a preliminary injunction, I should emphasize, they're asking the courts to immediately block the plans and to be preliminarily enjoined while the litigation is ongoing. That should be clearly rejected because they can't demonstrate a likelihood that they'll prevail on the merits or any of the other criteria needed to secure a preliminary injunction. Hand it back to you, Winston.
Thank you, Abby. And so I'm just going to try to put together some of the pieces that she and I have already laid out, like really at a human level, what is at stake here. So we talk about the SAVE plan, like can change lives. It like really already is. So roughly 8 million borrowers have already enrolled or been enrolled in this plan. According to the White House, a little over half of those people qualify for $0 payments under this more generous plan. And, 1 million qualify for less than $100, so significantly more affordable for 5.5 million people. And as of a month or two ago, 360,000 people have already had their debts canceled, totaling $4.8 billion, right? And this is under that cancel your debt after 10 years, not 20 or 25 years provision of the SAVE plan. That means that these people are sort of by definition people who didn't borrow quite as much, but were still struggling to pay off their debt after 10 years and had something left to cancel, right? So it's really already changing lives. there's also, this has contributed to something the Biden administration has been very successful at, which is canceling debt for public service workers under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Plan program. And since the SAVE plan sort of pipes into that in a way that we'll talk about, it's significant that, close to 1 million people have gotten, over $60 billion in debt canceled. And again, these are all programs created by Congress. They're just being made to work for the people who Congress intended them to work for, right? So this is not so crazy or novel. Let's drill down into the actual 18, many, not all of you, but many of you are from these 18 states that are suing to stop this, both to stop it immediately and ultimately to get it invalidated. So this is already changing lives, right? So this is from the fall, but this is data from the White House about the number of borrowers who are enrolled in these 18 states, right? So a little over 2 million total. And I just want to sort of you can find your state on here and see the number of people, but this is the number of people whose interests, at least whose interests the state is actively working against, right? I think there's a lot to be said for how we all do better when people aren't buried in student debt. People invest in their economy, their dollars stay locally and circulate. They don't go out to a servicer to pay their fees or something. They start businesses, they buy homes, they take less high-paying jobs that do better for the world. Maybe they stay and they become a local general practitioner doctor instead of having to go be a sort of higher paid specialist somewhere else. So, this is the minimum number of people in each state whose interests are being thwarted because their government chose to sue and join a case to try to shut this down. And this is just the people who've enrolled. As Abby said, some people have already gotten their debts canceled. This is the number of people and the amount of debt in millions that people in these 18 states, again, broken out by the two different cases, have gotten already canceled, right? They no longer have debt, specifically because of the SAVE program, right? Not as part of like a fungible group of people, like because they were qualified for SAVE under the parameters of the SAVE plan, they got their debts canceled at some point over the last 4 or 5 months. For a total of, a little over about 83,000 people, $1.5 billion, right? And again, you can look to each state here and see like these are the people, and this is the amount of relief that their states are affirmatively trying to undo and stop, right? So just this is not abstract for these communities. This is in fact very real and extremely quantifiable, right? And I just wanted to also underscore the relationship between the SAVE plan and the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Plan program, I should say. So again, for PSLF, or Public Service Loan Forgiveness, the way it works is there are a lot of eligibility requirements, which frankly make it very frustrating, but it's been getting improved. One of which is that you make payments on your loan while you have a public service job, and you make those payments on a certain kind of repayment plan. The SAVE plan is that repayment plan. So the SAVE plan qualifies you, if you have the right kind of job, to get public service loan forgiveness. And because the SAVE plan is so much more affordable, this makes life significantly easier for public service workers who now might be able to get their debt cancellation while actually having to pay fewer dollars out of pocket over the 10 years that it takes to earn that cancellation under PSLF. And then the final thing that's at stake is both abstract and extremely real, is that this is the second time, at least, we've seen, on this issue, I'll say, not the second time ever and recently, that we've seen sort of very politicized litigation and the co-opting of the courts, right? So this is some of the same arguments that Abby mentioned that were used in this case, Nebraska v. Biden last year, which is what went to the Supreme Court and canceled the debt relief that Biden had planned for over 40 million borrowers. Not complete cancellation, but cancellation that would have benefited over 40 million US borrowers. And this logic that the servicer based in Missouri that has a historical affiliation with the state of Missouri, that like them losing loan volume account is somehow harm to the state, was their justification. It was the foot in the door, she said, and it got them up to the Supreme Court and it canceled the whole plan. And we're seeing that exact playbook being used again. It might not be successful for all 18 states, but it only takes one state to do this. And Missouri did it last year and it'll do it again this year. The federal government has already started to brief this and file papers, and we're seeing them put forward like a very strong defense of this plan for all the reasons Abby said, like, you're not really harmed, you can't sue us. And even if you were harmed and could sue us, you don't have merit on your side, right? Like, we have the legal authority to do this, right? That's the sort of the two-step with any lawsuit. Are you the right one to sue us? Okay, if you are, do you have a winning argument? And here they're saying you're not the right ones to sue us and you don't have a winning argument. So we're really seeing this very politicized, and MOHELA, as an example, I have it up here, is a legacy, it's quasi-state legacy agency that is from a prior era of student loans that really has no relevance other than the fact that it's a company now that enters contracts and gets paid to do this work, but they're using that sort of using it to get their foot in the door and dictate federal policy, quite frankly. We're seeing this on a variety of issues, but we're here to speak today to the student loan sort of debt crisis. So that's, what is at stake here is also the validity of the courts. All right, so we asked you all to come here to talk about this. Why did we do that? One, we think this is very important for all the reasons Abby and I have outlined, and our colleagues are working very hard, folks on this call and not on this call. But there is a role, especially for organizations in these 18 states. And I hope that you're like a little hot under the collar now, that you're as angry as we are for yourselves, for your neighbors, for the communities that you go to serve every day, even if you're not working on economic justice or student loan debt issues. This certainly affects people. So we'd love to figure out a way for people who are fired up to get plugged in. So I'm just going to drop these here. So one, there is litigation going on, right? As Abby said, there is going to be in Kansas, the first hearing is at the end of this month, and in Missouri, it's and this is filed in Kansas, and in the Missouri case filed in Missouri, it'll be in the first week of June. So they're about a month off, a couple weeks off. That's at the trial level, district court level. We anticipate whatever the outcome of that is, these will be appealed up to the Court of Appeals, the circuits, right? And there will probably be a couple of amicus briefs filed. Those are people who are not parties to the case, but have a stake in it or have some expertise or opinion they want the judge to consider. They can file a brief and provide information to the court. A lot of groups did this for the Supreme Court case last summer in Nebraska with the student debt cancellation, and there's probably going to be an opportunity to do that at some scale here. And it would be really fantastic to have groups representing the voice of residents of these states make their voice heard and not have, frankly, what is like a very hyper-politicized attorney general office purport to speak for them, right? It's just hard for me to believe that anyone who would benefit from this wants their state to go in and shut it down, right? Similarly, there are less formal ways to get involved, and you just writing in your local community papers that people actually read, writing in high circulation papers that people also read is fantastic and doesn't have to be overly technical. It can be as simple as, I just learned my state is doing this. Why are they doing this? This is a good thing for me or for my neighbor if I'm not benefiting from it personally. For those who are more politically active, expressing discontent to the Attorney General's office or to other elected officials who should really understand what the state is doing here, right? The AG is just an actor for the state. The state is doing this, and the AG is acting on their behalf. And not everyone in the state might agree about this. And if they're not following the news on it, they might want to be made aware or at least understand that not everyone in their community is happy about this. And the final thing is educating communities and the individual borrowers that, really this is all about, both that this is happening and they might feel they want to get engaged or they might want to go to the ballot box about this or whatever the case may be, but also because the SAVE plan is still good law, right? They just might want to enroll in an affordable student loan repayment plan. And if they haven't done that yet, it's still worth it to do. Until a judge says otherwise, that plan is full steam ahead. You saw, I'm just going to click back, like all these people who've gotten their loans canceled, enrolled, canceled. Why not keep upping these numbers, right? There are people who haven't enrolled yet who could get their debts canceled or qualify for a $0 payment. And, we are advocates and we don't want to lead people astray, but there's no reason right now why someone who's not enrolled in SAVE shouldn't enroll in the SAVE plan. So, that's what we have for now. I think we have time for questions. And I really, again, just want to reiterate, or actually, maybe I should say next steps, right? You've come here, we're going to circulate out the recording of this. We'd be happy to follow up with individuals. It is unlikely that there will be an amicus opportunity in the next couple of weeks, right? To sign on to an amicus brief or something, but when the appellate, these two cases are currently in parallel with each other. They could get out of sync with each other, but so far they're in sync with each other time-wise. But we'd love to be able to circle back with people this summer and fall as the opportunity to formally weigh in at the court arises, just to see if anyone is interested in doing that. So we can certainly follow up with people since we have their contact information. We're also happy to field questions. There are some resources I'm going to put here that you can, again, we'll include these in a follow-up email as well. But, there are certain instances where we'll follow up with you, but if in the coming weeks you want to follow up with us, because you do want to do a letter to the editor or an op-ed and you just sort of want feedback on what that should look like. we're happy to do that, and we can make sure that our contact info is shared. But we do also have some questions currently in the Q&A, so I will open that up and then see if Abby and I can tag team that. So someone asked, these are great questions. You know, MOHELA, as Abby mentioned, is sort of the tip of the spear here, and they are located in Missouri. And is that how Missouri got standing? So Missouri, that's why they filed in Missouri. That's why they're in a federal court in Missouri. But MOHELA will have Missouri, the state will have to demonstrate and show that it has standing on the basis of the company MOHELA. So they still have some work to do, but that is one of the reasons for like the geographic location they picked. And I don't want to get too in the weeds, but Abby, if you want to add any more color on that, please do.
Yeah, I was just going to add, you know, in the Missouri's relationship with MOHELA and the claim that MOHELA would be financially set back by President Biden's one-time cancellation plan last summer was how Missouri was found to have standing by the Supreme Court in that case. Here it is another, at least in the case led by Missouri, this relationship with MOHELA is the chief way that those states are claiming that they should have standing this time around. They make, as I mentioned, some other arguments that seem like pretty easily dismissed, but they haven't yet demonstrated it, and it's a very fact-specific inquiry. And I think the Department of Education in its briefing filed at midnight last night made really strong arguments for why MOHELA is unlikely to be financially harmed by the SAVE plan, and why therefore Missouri hasn't met its burden of demonstrating that it has standing to challenge the plan.
And that sort of relates to the next question, which is, you know, why does the government care if MOHELA loses money? What's, you know, the concern to the government? So there's two governments at play here, right? The state government, the state of Missouri, I don't think I'm being too conspiratorial when I say that they don't really care, because we haven't actually seen evidence that MOHELA is losing money. There's a lot happening with that company right now, and they're actually forfeiting about 15% of their portfolio to other servicers because they're overwhelmed with their servicing volume. So on the one hand, they're saying if people get cancellation, we'll have fewer accounts and we'll make less money. On the other hand, they're giving up more accounts voluntarily than they would lose under the cancellation. So it just factually, it sort of doesn't hold water, their arguments. So the state, you know, it's been a little conspiratorial, is just using that as a pretext to challenge this because politically they don't like Biden's policy of helping student loan borrowers. That's sort of it. The federal government doesn't really care either way. The federal government, MOHELA has a contract with the federal government to service, and the federal government's opinion, as they've demonstrated with SAVE by defending it, is that they set policy and their contractors just need to follow their policy. They're not trying to make or lose money for the companies that have contracts to service these loans. So there's, again, the two governments, and the state government hasn't demonstrated a real financial interest. They're just using it as a pretext that worked last summer with the Supreme Court, but we will have to see if it works again with this. And the federal government is not making decisions based on its contractors' profitability. All right, here's an interesting one that I think there's a lot of outcomes, and I don't know if we want to run them all down, because the big answer is it could be any number of things, and we'll all have to just wait and see. But Abby, what happens if someone's debt is canceled and then there's an injunction? Do they have to begin repayment?
The short answer is we don't know. The lawsuits have not specifically requested that debts that were already canceled be sort of uncanceled or reinstated. And in fact, the Kansas Attorney General suggested that, like, once the debts are canceled, that egg probably can't be unscrambled. It's sort of conceding that they wouldn't be able to put those debts back into repayment. But it's not clear. We don't know what the courts will ultimately decide here, and I think it's unlikely that debts that have already been canceled would be reinstated. There are a lot of practical and legal reasons that shouldn't be the case. But you know, that is an animating purpose of this lawsuit is to prevent the government from being able to cancel these loans under the SAVE program. So so the short answer is probably not, but we don't know for sure yet.
Yeah, and I'd say it also depends too, the outcome of like what happens to borrowers who either already were canceled or haven't yet had their debt canceled, but are just making affordable payments on Save. It sort of depends on who's in the White House and who runs the Department of Education, because this might take up, this litigation could run into 2025. And the Biden administration has demonstrated a couple of times, and frankly, the Trump administration did too, but less consistently, that they will use extraordinary measures to help borrowers when things go a little bit off the rails. So if a court invalidates this whole program, the Biden administration could pause payments again. They could use other emergency sort of powers to make sure people aren't stuck in limbo. They could move everyone to a different affordable plan. There are options there too for people whose debt hasn't yet been canceled but might be thrown into limbo. But as Abby said, the main answer is we don't know yet, both because it's so many possible outcomes, but also because there's not a specific answer for each of those possible outcomes. A sort of factual quick one, I think, is why are two separate cases filed and how are they different? They're almost identical, like almost identical in what they claim, what they're asking for, the drafting. I think the answer to why there are two is probably just double your chances. Like each court can really act independently. And if they all go in one court and they got a bad judge and the judge disagreed with them, they've now maximized. It's a bit of like forum selection, sort of venue shopping, right? They wanted to have a greater chance and more chances to get the outcome that they want. I mean, it's probably more of a resource delegation thing that they did two, not 18, but in theory, 18 states could have independently sued in their own states to do this too, but this way they get to share the work. Someone asked, and this is a great question, I want to make this crystal clear. So if a state has sued as part of this lawsuit to stop the SAVE plan, does that mean borrowers in that state cannot currently enroll? This plan is still good to go all across the country until a judge steps in and says otherwise. Everywhere in the country, borrowers can and should enroll in the SAVE plan. Now, we might get to messiness if one of these judges enjoins or says you can't proceed with the SAVE plan. Only, there's this phenomenon in the country of judges, district court trial judges doing what's called a nationwide injunction, which means that one judge, because of one lawsuit, changes policy all across the country. That could happen here, or they can make a decision that only affects the states that sued or only affects the state that the court is in. So until a judge decides something, every borrower can, everywhere in the country, enroll in SAVE if they're eligible, and they should do that. Once a decision is made, we have to see what that decision is to know who it affects, if it's everyone in the country or a subset of people. Anything you would want to add to that, Abby?
No, just I will say that in the briefing, the federal government has suggested that if there is any injunction, that the courts should consider limiting it to the states that are suing. In other words, hey states, you have a problem with this SAVE plan. If you want to block it, we'll only allow you to be blocked for your residents. Of course, the federal government doesn't get to choose that. The judges do. So it's a possible outcome, but it's one of many possible outcomes.
All right, Abby, I have another sort of wonky question for you, and I think we don't need to get two because it brings us into adjacent areas. But if the Supreme Court overrules the Chevron rule of deferring to agency expertise, how will that affect the SAVE plan regulations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everyone is anticipating that the Supreme Court is going to overrule the Chevron precedent, which was a precedent regarding a certain amount of discretion, judicial discretion to federal agencies. And I think it is part of a broader context where we're seeing more judicial second guessing of agency rulemaking that as a broader movement is deeply concerning to me, and it's concerning for the ability of the Department of Education to manage the federal student loan program. That said, none of the briefing, and I read all the briefing in these cases so far, and they don't talk about Chevron deference. So I think that that ultimately it is probably not going to have a significant impact on these cases. These cases, the major questions doctrine is a much bigger issue in these cases. And I've talked to folks at the CFPB and the Department of Education, and they've sort of said, we haven't got one on Chevron deference in years anyway, so we don't really count on it or rely on it in this day and age. So that gave me some I don't know, so a little bit of reassurance, but I do think that the larger movement away from respecting agency expertise is a problem.
And then the final question, unless folks want to add more, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, is it more effective or even possible for a small local teachers union to file an amicus brief? Would it be more effective to ask our state affiliate to file the brief? And this is a question from Texas. So this is a combination of like what's effective and also what's realistic and resources, right? So just if folks are unfamiliar, the way that amicus briefs often work is you'll, a lawyer or someone will write it on behalf of the amicus, the friend of the court. And in that instance, you can have multiple people on. So this could work out anyway. It's probably more realistic and resource sort of best use of resources to have either a state affiliate coordinate with local affiliates to get on the same brief, or to have, if this is an instance of a teachers union, have teachers unions from all of the states, join the same brief and coordinate that way. And there's a bit of a sort of statement of interest in the very beginning, and each member has the opportunity to provide a couple sentences about why they're interested in it. And then they share the sort of the brief argumentation and the substance there. So I sort of anticipate that there will be fewer briefs, but more people signed on to each one, and they can group by subject matter or by shared theme or by geography in some meaningful way. And this is something that we can work with groups over the next couple of months to figure out. But I think it makes more sense to have a teachers union brief and have as many union affiliates that are interested in join that, than to have 12 teachers union briefs. That's a little bit of a strategy question. And again, others may differ. So Abby, if you have any other thoughts on that, feel free to share them.
No, I agree.
Great. So I think that is the end of our questions, which means it's also the end of our presentation. So I again want to thank everyone for coming and joining and learning about this. And I hope that you're fired up about this and sort of tell your colleagues and start talking about this as an organizational benefit. No matter what you do, people in your community and catchment area are probably affected by this on some level. And then stay tuned. We'll follow up with follow-up information and a recording of this. And then over the coming months, we'd love to provide updates on the litigation to you all and continue to support and help you identify ways that you can plug in, which again, range from a formal amicus brief joining it to community-based letters to the editor or op-eds to talking to your local elected officials. But certainly don't hold back on sharing the news about SAVE with your community, right? People should definitely continue to enroll if they haven't yet. And both the NCLC website on here and the SBPC website on here have information about SAVE and about what income-driven repayment is. So thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up for today and reach out if you have any questions, and stay tuned.